Hi everyone, welcome to Chalk Talk Med, where I cover high-yield medicine topics for students. In today's video, we're going to be talking about a type of necrosis called caseous necrosis. Caseous means cheesy, so of course I couldn't resist the opportunity to insert a cheesy joke here. So what does the cheese say to itself in front of the mirror? I'll reveal the answer at the final slide. All right, so here's an outline of this video. We're going to start with an overview of cell death and see where caseous necrosis fits in. Then we're going to talk about the tissue hallmark features of caseous necrosis, then its mechanisms and causes, and finally the key findings on histology and gross pathology. Let's get started. All right, so let's start with an overview of cell death. It can occur via two different main mechanisms, apoptosis and necrosis, and they're very much the opposite of each other in how they cause cell death, and you can learn more about that by checking out this video right here that's linked up here as well. Now, apoptosis itself can occur by two separate pathways, the intrinsic mechanism and the extrinsic mechanism. And necrosis itself has 6 different types, and each of these types of necrosis represents what the underlying necrotic tissue looks like. All right, so we're focusing on necrosis in the rest of this video. So here are the 6 tissue types of necrosis that we saw on the last slide. And the first thing I want to point out is that the name can be very helpful in helping you learn what's going on with the tissue. So liquefactive necrosis means that the tissue is liquefied, whereas in caseous necrosis, it means that the necrotic tissue has a cheese-like consistency, and so on and so forth. So it's a good idea to learn the names because it can help you understand the underlying tissue description and pathophysiology. The last thing to point out here is that as you're watching each of the videos for each of these types of necrosis, the things that you should focus on learning for exam questions are what the underlying unique causes are, what's the pathophysiology and mechanism, and what you're going to see on histopathology. So those are the things that I'm going to focus on in these videos. All right, so now let's talk about caseous necrosis. So remember that all 6 types of necrosis have their own unique hallmarks. And for caseous necrosis, there are 3 important things to know. This is going to help you identify that the cause of your condition is caseous necrosis. Number 1, the cause of the necrosis is usually infection by a pathogen, and it's usually not just any old pathogen. It's usually hardy pathogens that are hard for the body to get rid of. So since the body can't clear them, it's going to contain them within this area of caseous necrosis. And the most commonly associated pathogen with caseous necrosis is tuberculosis. In medical school, whenever you hear about tuberculosis, you're almost always hearing about caseous necrosis and vice versa. So it is very important to know this association, very high yield. Second important feature is on gross pathology. This is going to have a cottage cheese appearance, and that's where it gets the name caseous necrosis from. So on gross pathology, and we're going to see a picture of it in a little bit, the necrotic tissue is going to have a cottage cheese appearance. And then the third important feature is that when you do histology, so when you look at this tissue under the microscope, you have a feature known as a caseating granuloma, which is shown in cartoon form right here. So now let's talk about what a caseating granuloma is, and I'm just going to divide this into the 2 separate words to make it easier. So a granuloma is basically just a collection of cells. Remember, anything in medicine that ends with oma, that usually means a tumor or collection of cells. So a granuloma is a collection of cells, specifically of specialized macrophages, along with lymphocytes and fibroblasts. So these come together and form a collection of cells, and this is known as a granuloma. And what these cells do, as you can see down here, is that they surround the pathogen and lead to chronic inflammation. So what you're seeing right here are these specialized cells, the macrophages, the lymphocytes, and fibroblasts. They're surrounding our pathogen right here. Let's say this green stuff is tuberculosis, and they're walling it off, and this is going to lead to chronic inflammation. So they're essentially trapping the pathogen. So that's this word right here, granuloma. The other thing important about caseous necrosis is that it is a caseating granuloma. And all that means is that at the center of this granuloma, where the pathogen is contained, there's going to be necrosis happening at that center. This is going to lead to formation of the cell fragments and debris, and this is what they mean by caseating. So a caseating granuloma is the histological finding. It's the collection of these macrophages, lymphocytes, and fibroblasts that are forming the granuloma with necrosis at the center, which makes it caseating. All right, so now we have a pretty good idea what's going on with caseous necrosis. Now let's just walk through the steps quickly. This will really help solidify your understanding of this. So step 1 in caseous necrosis is you have an infection. Again, remember, Mycobacterium tuberculosis is the most common pathogen. A couple of other high yield ones that sometimes exams like you to know is systemic fungi, as well as a bacteria known as Nocardia. These can also cause caseous necrosis. So you have infection by a pathogen like this, so you're going to have invasion of the tissue. And so the first sort of set of soldiers that are going to respond to this invasion are the macrophages. So these macrophages respond to the invasion by this pathogen and they become activated by the immune system. And once these macrophages become activated, they're going to actually transform. It's kind of like Transformers. They're going to transform into specialized macrophages. And there are two types of specialized macrophage cells, epithelioid and multinucleated giant cells. So epithelioid cells are activated macrophages. As a result of this activation, they have more proteins in their cytoplasm, and therefore they're going to have an eosinophilic cytoplasm. So that's how they're recognized. So they're essentially just macrophages that have a more eosinophilic cytoplasm because they've been activated and they have more proteins. The multinucleated giant cells are obviously just really large macrophages that have fused to form these larger cells, and that's why they have multiple nuclei, because they're created by the fusion of multiple macrophages together. Now, this is good for the immune system because now that you have these activated and giant macrophages, they're going to start to surround this pathogen. The goal here is to essentially create a little jail so that the pathogen gets trapped inside of it. So that's what's going to start to happen with these macrophages. The next thing is that they're going to get more help coming from the rest of the immune system, specifically lymphocytes. So lymphocytes are also going to show up and help wall off the pathogen. And finally, another group of cells known as the fibroblasts are also going to come and help out. And so all of these are going to form a collection that's going to wall off the pathogen. And as we already learned, this is going to lead to the formation of what's called a granuloma. All right, so we're almost done here. So now the pathogen is trapped in the center of this granuloma, and now the immune system and those cells do their thing. They're going to start destroying the pathogen, and this is going to lead to necrosis, and therefore this becomes a caseating granuloma. And so your final outcome is going to be this granular debris, which is essentially fragments of dying cells at the center of this granuloma. All right, so now let's see how this is going to look on histopathology. So on gross pathology, you have what's called caseous necrosis. So this is an example of tuberculosis in a lung, and this is the caseous necrosis right here. So as you can see, this is the cottage cheese appearance of the area of necrosis. Now, if you look under histology, this is what you have, the caseating granuloma. So if you take a look right here, you can see that all the way surrounding this area right here, you have this high density of cells. This is the collection of your lymphocytes, your specialized macrophages especially, and your fibroblasts. So all of this right here on the outside is the granuloma, and at the center of that you have this necrotic tissue that is at the center where the pathogen is getting attacked by the immune system and where all the necrosis is occurring, and this is what's causing the granuloma to be caseating. All right, so before we wrap up this video, I've included a little final factoid here just to help save you some time from having to look this up later. So we've been talking about caseating granulomas, so you might have been thinking there gotta be a non-caseating granuloma as well, and there is, you're correct. So I'm gonna just explain to you what that is here, even though these don't have anything to do with necrosis, but they are pretty important and high yield. And when you're studying and you see the word granuloma, the first question you should ask yourself is, are they talking about a caseating granuloma or non-caseating granuloma? Because it helps you figure out the cause. So remember, granuloma is a collection of macrophages, lymphocytes, and fibroblasts. They come together and surround the bad stuff in the middle. They lead to chronic inflammation. We've been talking about caseating granuloma. All that means is that at the center of this granuloma, this collection of cells, there's necrosis going on, and this is always going to be caused by an infection, the pathogens that we've already talked about. The difference with non-caseating is that this means that there is no necrosis at the center of the granuloma. So you still have the granuloma, which is those collections of cells, but at the center of it, there's no necrosis going on. The second important distinction is that the cause of non-caseating granuloma is not an infection. It's usually an autoimmune condition like sarcoidosis or Crohn's disease. The other common cause can be a foreign body like a splinter or a suture. The final high yield point about non-caseating granuloma is that the most common cause you're going to see for exam questions is going to be sarcoidosis. All right, so now let's wrap up with our cheesy joke of the day. What does cheese say to itself in the mirror? Looking Gouda. All right, that's it and that's all. If you enjoyed this video, you want to learn more about this topic, check out these related videos that I've linked here. You can also search our channel, Chalk Talk Med, for other topics to see if they're covered. And finally, if there are other videos that you want to see or you just want to give some feedback, please feel free to drop your thoughts in the comment section. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.